You trust your memory more than almost anything else, more than other people's accounts, more than photographs sometimes, definitely more than what someone else says happened. You say, I know what happened. I was there. That feeling of certainty, that's the trap. Because here's what the neuroscience actually shows, clearly, repeatedly, without much room for argument. What you remember is not what happened. It's what your brain decided to store, and then quietly kept editing every single time you looked at it. And the part that should bother you most isn't that memory makes mistakes, it's that you can't feel the mistakes happening. From the inside, a false memory and a real one feel identical, completely. There's no flag, no asterisk, no signal that says this part was added later. I've been wrong about things I was certain I remembered. Most people have, if they're honest about it. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is why. What memory actually is, what it's doing, and what it means that the thing you call your past is something your brain is actively constructing right now. That's what this is about. Not memory being bad, memory being something completely different from what we assume it is. And once you see that, really see it, it changes how you think about identity, about testimony, about every story you've ever told about yourself. Here's the model most people carry around without ever examining it. Memory is like a filing cabinet. Something happens, it gets stored, and when you want it back, you open the drawer and pull out the file. Maybe a little faded at the edges, maybe some details missing, but fundamentally the same thing that went in. That model is wrong, not approximately wrong, fundamentally wrong. There is no file. There's no single location in your brain where a memory sits waiting to be retrieved. What gets stored after an experience are fragments, sensory traces scattered across different brain regions, emotional tags attached to context cues, timing signals, partial images, half sounds. When you remember something, your brain doesn't retrieve it, it reassembles it in real time from those scattered pieces. The word for this is reconstruction, and reconstruction means there's a process happening, a process that can make errors, fill in gaps with plausible guesses, and be shaped by everything you currently know, believe, feel, and expect. Frederick Bartlett showed this in 1932. He gave people an unfamiliar Native American folk story, The War of the Ghosts, and asked them to recall it after various intervals. They didn't just forget details. They systematically changed the story, rounded it toward their own cultural expectations, added narrative coherence that wasn't in the original, made it make sense in ways the original didn't. They weren't lying. They were certain they were remembering accurately. The reconstruction had no signature, no label saying this part was filled in. It just felt like memory. Imagine if every time you opened a document on your computer, the software silently rewrote parts of it to make it more consistent with your other documents, and you had no way of knowing it had done that. That's closer to what memory actually does than a filing cabinet. Now here's the part that makes it stranger. Remembering isn't just reconstruction, it's also overwriting. Every time you retrieve a memory, it becomes temporarily unstable. The neuroscience term is labile, vulnerable to change. While it's active, while you're in the act of remembering, it can be modified. Then it reconsolidates, gets stored again. But what gets stored is the version you just reconstructed, including any errors, including any updates, including any emotional recoloring that happened while you were remembering. This is called reconsolidation, and it means every recall event is also an edit event. The more you remember something, the more edited it becomes. A memory you've recalled hundreds of times is not a well-preserved original. It's been through hundreds of editing passes, each one invisible to you, none of them leaving a trace. The most vivid, most important memories of your life, the ones you've revisited the most, are the most edited ones. Elizabeth Loftus spent her career documenting this. The misinformation effect. People who witnessed an event and were then given subtly incorrect information about it would incorporate the wrong information into their memories. Genuinely, not as a conscious decision, the implanted detail and the remembered detail became indistinguishable at the level of storage. Because there's no level of storage where they're different. The brain doesn't tag one as original and one as added later. It just stores what gets consolidated. She showed people a video of a car accident. Afterwards, some were asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Others were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? That single word, smashed instead of hit, caused people to estimate higher speeds, and a week later to report seeing broken glass that wasn't in the video. One word, changed the memory. No awareness it had happened. So we've established that memory is reconstructive, and that every retrieval edits the memory. The next question almost asks itself, if the system works this way, can you create a memory from scratch? Can you give someone a memory of something that never happened? Yes, and it's not difficult. Loftus ran what became known as the Lost in the Mall experiments. Participants received a booklet describing 4 childhood events, supposedly from family members. 3 were real. 1 was invented, being lost in a shopping mall at age 5, panicking, being helped by an elderly stranger, eventually being reunited with family. About a quarter of participants didn't just accept the false memory, they elaborated on it, added emotional detail, described the stranger's appearance, remembered how they felt. By the follow-up interview, some were reluctant to give it up when told it had been fabricated. They'd become attached to it. It felt like theirs. And here's the thing that actually matters. The false memory felt exactly like the real ones. There was no internal quality marker, no phenomenological difference. The subjective experience of remembering something that never happened is identical to the subjective experience of remembering something that did. This has been replicated. Memories of childhood medical procedures, animal attacks, emotional family events, implanted with leading questions and social suggestion over time. No hypnosis, no special technique, just the ordinary social pressure of being told by someone you trust that something happened. Now consider what this means for a courtroom. Eyewitness testimony, confident, vivid, firsthand, is still treated as powerful evidence. The witness believes what they're saying. They're not lying. But belief and accuracy are 2 completely separate things, and the human memory system doesn't link them the way we assume it does. The Innocence Project has documented over 375 wrongful convictions where faulty eyewitness memory played a central role. Real people, real convictions, real years of their lives, on the basis of someone who was completely certain they were remembering accurately and was wrong. Here's a twist that cuts deeper. The memories that feel most real, most vivid, most permanent, the ones we call flashbulb memories, turn out to be among the least accurate. Where were you when you heard about something catastrophic? A major attack, a sudden death, a moment of collective shock? You can probably answer that. You feel like you know it precisely. The clarity of the memory seems like proof of its accuracy.
Ulrich Neisser and Nicole Harsh studied exactly this. They interviewed people the morning after the Challenger space shuttle disaster in 1986, documented their accounts in writing, and then re-interviewed them years later. The confidence levels were high. The accuracy was poor. People had themselves in different locations, hearing the news from different sources, having different emotional reactions, none of which matched their original written accounts. When shown their own writing from the day of the event, some participants refused to believe they'd written it. They trusted their current memory over their own contemporaneous written record. Extreme emotion doesn't improve encoding. It makes the experience feel more significant, which increases confidence. But the actual neural encoding process under high stress and strong emotion is more disrupted, not less. More errors get in, not fewer. The cruelest irony? The events that matter most to us, the ones we feel most certain about, are the ones where the gap between subjective confidence and actual accuracy is widest. Now I want to go one level deeper, into something called confabulation, because it reveals something about the healthy brain that we'd rather not see. Confabulation is what happens when certain types of brain damage, particularly to the frontal lobes, or in some forms of amnesia, cause patients to produce fluent, confident, detailed accounts of things that never happened. Not lying, not confused about what's real. They genuinely believe what they're saying. The accounts are coherent, emotionally appropriate, filled with specific detail, and entirely fabricated. William Herstein's research identified this as a failure of a checking process that normally runs in all of us. In a healthy brain, when memory reconstruction produces an output, there's an ongoing audit, a cross-referencing against other knowledge, an assessment of plausibility. When something implausible comes through, the system flags it, adjusts, suppresses it. You don't experience this consciously. It just runs in the background and produces what feels like a confident memory. In confabulating patients, that checking system is damaged, so everything that gets reconstructed comes out feeling equally valid and real. The output is identical in phenomenological quality to accurate memory. The only difference is whether it corresponds to something that happened. The implication for the rest of us: confabulation is a malfunction of a system that runs in all healthy brains. Our checking system isn't perfect. It has biases. It can be fooled by leading questions, social pressure, prior belief, emotional state. What we experience as memory confidence is partly the output of this checking system,
and that system is fallible in ways we can't directly observe from the inside. There's no asterisk, no this part uncertain. It all comes out with the same confidence. Now step back from the neuroscience for a moment, because there's a bigger question sitting here. Most of what you call yourself is a narrative. There's a continuous story of who you are, where you came from, what shaped you, what you've been through, what you've learned, who you used to be, and how you got to now. That narrative is your identity, as much as anything is, and that narrative is made of memories. If memories are reconstructions that drift and get edited every time you revisit them, what does that mean for the story? What are you exactly, if the record of your own past is something your brain keeps quietly rewriting? The philosopher John Locke argued that personal identity over time is grounded in memory continuity. You're the same person as your 5-year-old self because you remember being that person. The memory chain is the identity chain. But if the memories you have of your earlier self have been reconstructed and reconsolidated hundreds of times, the chain is being maintained by something that keeps changing. The you in those early memories isn't stored somewhere intact. It's being rebuilt every time you think about it, in the context of everything you've become since. The past version of you has been written, at least partly, backward from where you ended up. I remember things about my younger self that are probably not quite right, not invented whole cloth, but shaped by how things turned out, by the story I've told about my own life, by the person I became looking back at the person I was. The me in those memories is partly real and partly constructed from the perspective of now. And here's something I want to be careful about. None of this means that trauma isn't real, or that suffering is fabricated, or that memory is useless. What it means is that the memory of any experience, including traumatic experience, is subject to the same reconstructive processes as every other memory. That has clinical implications. That's part of what was at the center of the recovered memory debates of the 1980s and 90s, where some therapeutic techniques inadvertently created vivid, emotionally genuine memories of events that hadn't occurred. The suffering was real. The memories were not. That's one of the harder truths in this entire territory. But I don't want to leave the impression that memory is simply broken, because it isn't. Here's the reframe that matters. A perfectly accurate memory system would be useless for survival. You don't need to remember every detail of every experience. You need to extract patterns, update your model of the world, recognize that the situation you're in now resembles something you've encountered before, and adjust your behavior accordingly. Reconstruction serves that purpose better than faithful recording would. When you rebuild a memory in the context of your current knowledge, you're often producing something that's more useful for navigating the present than the original experience would be. Jorge Luis Borges wrote a story about a character named Funes, who had perfect eidetic memory, every moment preserved in complete detail, unrepeated, uncategorized. He was paralyzed. He couldn't generalize. He was crushed under the weight of every specific, unsummarized experience. Perfect memory isn't intelligence. It might be the opposite of it. Memory is optimized for usefulness, not fidelity. It's a forward-looking system that masquerades as a backward-looking one. The real question it's answering isn't what exactly happened, it's what should I expect next, and how should I behave given what I've been through. Reconstruction serves that, better than a filing cabinet would. But knowing why memory works this way doesn't make it more accurate. Understanding the design doesn't give you access to the original signal. The reconstruction is still all you have. And you can't tell from the inside where the reconstruction ends and the actual event begins. So here's where we actually are. Memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Every recall event is also an edit event. False memories are indistinguishable from true ones from the inside. Extreme emotion increases confidence and decreases accuracy. The system that validates memory can be fooled by a single word, by suggestion, by the passage of time, by the story you've told about yourself. You can be given a memory of something that never happened, and you will defend it, elaborate on it, and feel it as yours. You cannot introspect your way out of this. Thinking harder about a memory doesn't make it more accurate. Feeling more certain doesn't make it more accurate. There's no internal quality you can examine that reliably separates what happened from what your brain decided happened. And this isn't some rare edge case. This is how the system works for everyone. Every human being walking around right now is navigating their life, making decisions, maintaining relationships, building identity on the basis of a past that is partially, invisibly, and continuously reconstructed. I've spent my career asking questions about the physical world, how particles behave,
how fields propagate, how the universe is put together at its finest levels. Those questions are hard, but this question, what am I, if my memories aren't what I thought they were, that one hits differently. Every time I look at it directly, it gets more uncomfortable and more interesting simultaneously. I know what it feels like to remember something. I have no idea if what I feel like I remember is what actually happened. I can't check. Nobody can. And I've decided that's not something to panic about. It's just the truth, the actual truth, not the comfortable version.
And the truth, even the uncomfortable kind, is always more interesting than the story we tell to feel safe. There's something almost beautiful in it, once you sit with it long enough. You're a creature trying to navigate forward into an unknown future, using a record of the past that your brain keeps rebuilding in real time to serve the next moment rather than preserve the last one. The reconstruction isn't a failure of the system. It is the system. You're not a recorder that makes mistakes. You're a model builder that keeps updating. The you that exists right now in this moment is partly made of things that happened, partly made of how you've understood them, partly made of the story you keep telling to hold it all together. The past isn't behind you, fixed and accessible. It's inside you, being continuously rewritten by the person you're becoming. That's not a metaphor. That's neuroscience.
And what it leaves you with isn't despair. It's something more interesting than despair. It's the question of who you actually are, if the record you've been trusting is something you've been writing all along.